Good morning, friends. Today we are going to see Japan's lost decade, and China is losing one now. Could India make the same mistake? In 1989, Japan looked unstoppable. Its companies were global giant. Its technology was admired around the world. Tokyo real estate was unbelievably heavily expensive. Japanese companies were buying properties in America. The Japanese economy looked like it was going to dominate the 21st century. And then the bubble burst. What followed became known as Japan's lost decades. But here is what the story but here is where the story gets interesting. Because decades later, another Asian giant experienced something eerily familiar: China. For years, China grew at extraordinary speed. Factories multiplied, cities exploded, property prices surged, infrastructure expanded, investment became the engine of growth. And then China's growth model began running into problems. Property weakened, debt increased, consumer confidence fell, demographics deteriorated, and the world's second largest economy entered a prolonged period of adjustment. Now look at India. India is growing rapidly. The stock market has expanded. Its cities are booming. Infrastructure investment is accelerating. Millions of people are entering the middle class. And investors are increasingly becoming on betting on India's future. But history gives us a terrifying question. What if the biggest danger to India's growth isn't a recession, but becoming too confident during the boom? Because Japan teaches us what happens after excessive optimism. China shows us what happens when investment becomes too important, and India may have a chance to learn from both before has to learn the hard way. The country that looked invincible. Chapter 1. Let's go back to Japan. The decade after the World War II, Japan experienced one of the greatest economic transformation in modern history. Factories expanded, export exploded. Japanese company became synonymous with quality. Toyota, Sony, Panasonic, Honda, Nikon. Japan was no longer simply recovering. It was becoming an economic superpower. And then something strange happened. Japan became obsessed with assets, especially land. Property prices increased dramatically. The stock market rose. Banks became increasingly willing to lend, and the rising asset prices created a psychological feedback loop. People believed prices are going up because Japan is becoming richer. So they borrowed. Invested. They bought more assets. And because everyone expected prices to rise, prices rose even further until they didn't. In 1989, Japanese stock market reached its historic peak. You have to see the documentaries at that time. You will see there were people who were going to vacations to Hawaii every weekend. That was the luxurious life of Japan in the 1989 before the bubble burst. And when the bubble burst, and suddenly the logic got reversed. Prices fell. Banks were left with bad loans. Businesses reduced investment. Consumer became cautious. And the economy entered a long period of weak growth. The most dangerous word in economy. There was There is a word economists use that sounds harmless: deflation. But deflation can become psychologically destructive. Imagine you want to buy a house. You think maybe it will be cheaper next year. So you wait. You want a new car. Maybe I will wait. A company want to build a new factory. Let's wait until demand improves. Millions of individual decisions begin pointing in the same direction. Wait, save. Don't invest, don't borrow, don't spend. And when everyone waits, economy growth slows. Japan discovered that escaping this cycle can be incredibly difficult. And this gives us our first lesson. A financial bubble isn't dangerous only because prices fell. It's dangerous because the psychology created by the bubble can survive longer after the bubble bursts. Enter China. Now we are going to see the Chinese case study. Now, fast forward, China's economic transformation was different. China didn't simply become a rich country through financial speculation, it built an enormous productive economy. Factories, ports, highways, railways, industrial clusters, export network, hundreds of millions of workers moved into the modern economy. China's growth was extraordinary, but eventually another problem appeared. Investment becomes extremely important. Construction became extremely important. Property became extremely important. Local government became deeply involved in the development and infrastructure. And for years, the system worked. Why? Because China's economy was growing rapidly. If you build a new city today, maybe millions of people arrive tomorrow. If you build a new factory, global demand may absorb the output. If you build a highway, economic activity follow. But eventually the return from simply building more things begin to decline. And that's where the model becomes difficult. The China's trap. Imagine an economy where the growth has traditionally come from investment, construction, infrastructure, property, exports. Now imagine the population is aging. Property demand slows, global trade becomes more complicated, debt increases, and consumer becomes less confident. Suddenly, the old growth engine doesn't produce the same result. The answer cannot simply be build more because eventually you run out of profitable things to build. China's current economic challenge is therefore not simply about one bad year. It's about transitioning from an old growth model towards one increasingly driven by consumption, productivity, and higher value industries. And that transition is difficult because economic models create habits. Companies learn to make money one way. Government learn how to finance themselves one way. Bank learn who to lend. Workers learn where jobs are. Investors learn where returns are. Changing all of that takes time. Now enter India. And now we arrive at India. India is the completely different position is in. It is important. India is in Japan in 1989. India is in China in 2010. India is still a developing economy with enormous room for productivity growth. It has a young population, rapidly growing digital infrastructure, large scale urbanization, rising incomes, expanding infrastructure, and huge potential for manufacturing and services. But so, why compare India with Japan and China? Because the most important economic lessons aren't about copying other countries' numbers, they are about recognizing patterns. And one pattern is especially important, the danger of confusing investment with productivity. If India builds a highway that reduces transportation time, that's productive. If India builds a port that dramatically lowers cost, productive. If India builds industrial infrastructure that attracts factory, productive. But if capital increasingly flows into asset simply because everyone expects their prices to rise, that's different. And this distinction becomes extremely important during a boom. The boom psychology. Every major economic boom creates a story. Japan had its story. Japan will dominate the world. China had its story. China will grow at double digit forever. And today India has its story. India is the next big economic superpower. Now, that story may ultimately be true, but here is the danger. A good long term story can still produce bad short term investment. Suppose Everyone believes India's economy will double. That's reasonable. But then someone starts saying, therefore this stock must go up, therefore this apartment must double, therefore this land can never fall, therefore every startup will succeed, therefore every company connected to India is a good investment. That's where optimism turns into speculation. And that's exactly what history repeatedly teaches us. A strong economy doesn't mean every asset is a good investment. India's real advantage. But India has something China and Japan doesn't have at exactly the same stage, a huge potential domestic market. India doesn't need to sell everything to the world to grow. The millions of India becomes richer, they will buy cars, homes, insurance, healthcare, education, electronics, travel, financial product, entertainment and better food. That creates an enormous internal market, and this could become one of the India's biggest advantage. China also developed a huge domestic market, but China's economy becomes heavily dependent on investment and exports during its rise. India has an opportunity to build a more balanced model, not just build, export, invest, but earn, consume, invest, innovate, produce, export. That's a much more sustainable cycle. The thing India must do, the thing India must not do. So, if you could give Indian policymakers one lesson from Japan and China, what would it be? Not don't build, not don't invest, not don't let property prices rise. The lesson is much simpler. Don't let one engine become the entire economy. Japan became heavily exposed to its asset bubble. China became heavily dependent on investment and property. India shouldn't become excessively dependent on any single source of growth. Not real estate, not government spending, not IT, not manufacturing, not exports, not the stock market, not consumer credit. A resilient economy needs multiple engines. Three possible Indias. Now imagine Indian economy in 2040. There are three possible variations. The productivity boom. India invests heavily in infrastructure. Education improves. Manufacturing becomes competitive. Service moves up the value chain. Cities becomes more productive. Women participation more fully in the workforce. Business becomes more efficient, income rises, consumption rises, and India's demographic advantage becomes real economic growth. This is the best case scenario. The asset boom. The economy growth, but asset prices grow even faster. Property becomes unaffordable. Household borrows more. Investor chases momentum. Speculation becomes normal. People stop asking, what does this asset produce, and start asking, who will buy it from me at a higher price? That's when the economy becomes vulnerable. The middle part. This may be the most realistic. India grows strongly but evenly. Some cities boom, others struggle. Some infrastructure become globally competitive, others disappear. Property rises in some places and stagnates in another. Manufacturing expands, services remains dominant. Productivity improves, but reforms happen gradually. It isn't a perfect miracle, it isn't a disaster, it's messy. And that's probably where India's economic future will actually look like. The biggest lesson from Japan. Japan's story contains a lesson that goes far beyond Japan. Economic growth creates confidence. Confidence creates investment. Investment creates more growth. And eventually, confidence can become excessive. And once expectation becomes unrealistic, the same mechanism works in reverse. That's why economists care so much about expectation. People don't make decisions based only on today's economy. They make decisions based on what they think tomorrow will look like. And when millions of people become extremely optimistic at the same time, markets can move far beyond fundamentals. The biggest lesson from China. China teaches us something different. An economy can invest its way to incredible growth, but it cannot necessarily invest its way to prosperity forever. Eventually, returns matter, productivity matters, consumption matters, innovation matters, demographic matters, and the quality of investment matters more than the quantity. Building another highway isn't automatically good. Building a highway that transforms an economic corridor is. Building another apartment tower isn't automatically bad. Building housing where millions of people actually want to live is productive. The question is never simply how much are we investing? The better question is what are we getting for the investment? India's 20-year test, and this is why the next 20 years could be so important for India. India doesn't need to become China. India it doesn't need to become Japan. It needs to become more productive than it is today. If India can turn its young population into skilled workers, if it can make its cities more efficient, if it can improve infrastructure, if it can increase manufacturing, if it can move millions of people from low productivity jobs to high productivity jobs, then India's growth story could be enormous. If economic growth becomes increasingly dependent on asset prices and debt, the story becomes more fragile. Japan's story began with confidence. China's story began with extraordinary investment. India's story is beginning with something different. Expectation. The world expects India to become one of the major economic powerhouse of the 21st century. Investors expect it, companies expect it, government expects it, and Indians themselves increasingly expect it. But expectations are not growth. A stock market isn't an economy. Skyscraper isn't productive. A rising house price isn't necessarily wealthy. And huge population isn't automatically a demographic dividend. The real question is much harder. Can India turn its people, capital, and infrastructure into higher productivity? Because if it can, India won't need to copy Japan, it won't need to copy China, it can create something different. But if India forgets the lesson of the countries that came before it, history has a strange habit of repeating itself. Japan shows us what happened when optimism becomes a bubble. China showed us what happens when investment becomes too dominant. And now India has something neither countries can give itself anymore: time. The question is whether India will use it, because the biggest economic advantage isn't being the next China. It isn't being the next Japan. It's learning from them before becoming them. Thank you.